Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. It's easy, fast, and it helps us produce new content.
James was always a man who valued stability. He liked waking up to the same routine, brewing coffee the same way, walking to work through the tree-lined streets of Portland, listening to the same indie rock playlist. He believed this showed maturity, a well-built life. Emily, on the other hand, was the opposite. She had a restless spirit, smiled with her eyes, and wanted to try everything from a new flavor of craft ice cream to the idea of skydiving on a vacation in Colorado. It was exactly this contrast between them that made everything work. They met in the middle. He provided structure. She brought lightness. For years, it seemed to work. That Thursday morning, as they had coffee in their cozy kitchen with Subway tiles, Emily mentioned a trip, a resort in Miami with themed parties, jet ski rentals, spa treatments, mojitos, and live music every night. Her excitement was almost childlike. She described the suites, the infinity pools, and the themed dinners as if she were recounting a dream she could hardly wait to live. James smiled politely. He didn't like the idea. He never cared for those kinds of places, nor the crowds, nor being surrounded by strangers pretending to be happy with colorful drinks in hand. She noticed his lack of enthusiasm and gave him that look he knew all too well. She said she understood if he didn't want to go, but she needed something to shake up the routine. Her voice carried a mix of firmness and sweetness. It was a request, but also a warning. James took a deep breath, sipped his now cold coffee, and asked if she'd like to go with someone else. Emily didn't hesitate. She said she could go with Sarah, her best friend from college. Sarah was fun, always up for an adventure, and they hadn't traveled together in years. James agreed, not because he wanted to, but because he believed loving someone also meant giving them space. In the days leading up to the trip, Emily seemed lighter, buzzing with preparations. She bought new clothes, tried on swimsuits, and spent hours watching videos about the resort. She laughed to herself watching clips of poolside dance parties, made lists on her phone, and talked to Sarah every day. James watched it all with that quiet look of someone trying to hide discomfort. She didn't seem to be running away from him, but something in her energy had shifted. It was as if she'd already left before she even departed. When Emily boarded the plane, she sent him a text saying she loved him and promised to send pictures. James replied with a heart emoji, though he wasn't sure how he really felt. For the first couple of days, she sent short texts full of emojis, along with photos of beaches and plates of key lime pie. But soon, her responses became less frequent, some unanswered. One night, he sent a voice message talking about his day, work, asking how she was. Hours later, she replied only, "I'm good, babe, I'll call you later." But the call never came. James fell asleep with the phone in his hand. On the third day, she went silent for nearly 20 hours. She only reappeared late in the afternoon, saying the resort's signal was spotty. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that was the real reason. But in that moment, he felt something tighten in his chest in a different way. He started replaying recent memories, conversations, her reactions. There was a laugh that seemed forced, an enthusiasm that only surfaced at certain times, a kind of silence that hadn't existed before. For the first time in a long time, James felt alone in his own marriage, wondering if he was being paranoid or if something had truly changed. When she returned, the first thing he noticed was the scent, a perfume he'd never smelled on her before, strong, striking, as if freshly applied. Emily was smiling, but in a rush. She told stories about the trip like she was on a talk show, laughed loudly, went overboard with her descriptions, and he just listened, quiet. On the outside, a present husband. On the inside, a man trying to piece together something that might have been broken long before the trip even started. During that first week after Emily's return, James tried to stick to his routine. He woke up at the usual time, made coffee, opened the living room windows, played the same playlist while packing his work bag. But no matter how much he tried to pretend everything was normal, there was something different in how he now noticed details. Before, he moved through days with a certain ease. Now, every little thing Emily did caught his attention. The way she avoided staying in the same room for too long, how she gripped her phone more tightly, always face down, as if hiding something. There was a new, subtle effort on her part to seem spontaneous. And that told him more than any explanation could. Saturday morning, while she was in the shower, James decided to put away the clothes from the suitcase she hadn't unpacked yet. It seemed simple, almost automatic. He just wanted to clear space in the closet. But the moment he opened the main compartment and saw a set of lingerie he'd never seen before, delicate fabrics, expensive brands, bold colors, his heart sank. Emily had never cared for that kind of lingerie. It wasn't her style, nor did it match the preferences they'd built over time. It was new, chosen for a purpose. She'd worn it thinking of someone, and that someone wasn't him. James closed the suitcase softly, his hands trembling. He didn't say a word. He went back to the kitchen, washed his mug, and spent the rest of the day in silence. That night, he said he had a headache and went to bed early. He lay facing the wall, pretending to sleep for hours while listening to Emily on her phone, pacing back and forth as if restless. When she finally got into bed, he kept his eyes closed and smelled that same perfume she brought back from the trip, a strong, elegant scent that now made him uneasy. A few days later, while Emily worked in the bedroom, James found himself scrolling through the resort's Instagram page. It was late. He said he was grabbing a snack and took the chance to be alone in the living room, phone in hand. He opened the resort's official page, scrolled through photos and posts, and decided to watch videos saved by guests. There were dozens, but one caught his eye. It showed a pool party, loud music, laughter, cocktails, people dancing around the pool. He paused at one point. Something grabbed his attention. A woman with loose hair, wearing a dress that reminded him of one Emily bought before the trip, was dancing close to a man in an open shirt and sunglasses. The image wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. The way she leaned into the dance, how they seemed in sync, how close their bodies were. It was Emily, and she wasn't with Sarah. Sarah appeared a few seconds later, off to the side, chatting with others, oblivious to what was happening between Emily and that man. James pressed play and paused several times. He tried to find an angle that would prove it was someone else, but everything confirmed it. It was her. The way she rolled her shoulders, that half smile, her arms around his neck, none of it fit a simple girl's trip. It was something else. It hurt. It knocked the ground out from under him. He put the phone in his pocket and went upstairs. Emily was reading, or pretending to. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a few seconds. She looked up and smiled, as if everything was fine. His voice came out dry. "Who was the man in the pool video?" She took a moment to respond, looking confused, maybe surprised he'd found out. She tried to downplay it, said it was just an event host. But the way she avoided his eyes said more than any excuse. When he pressed, she hesitated, changed her story, tried to force a laugh. In the end, she said, "It's not what it looks like." Those words hit like a gunshot. It was exactly what it looked like. Someone having fun in secret, living another story on a trip far from obligations. The woman he loved was now trying to wriggle out of it with flimsy explanations. Inside, he was in ruins, but he stayed calm, almost cold, as if the pain had given way to clarity. The trust had dissolved. He asked again, firmly. She lost her composure, cried, said she loved him, that she was confused, that the trip affected her in ways she didn't expect. She tried to justify it, saying she felt lonely, ignored in recent months. Every word was a subtle way of shifting blame to him, as if that explained what she'd done. James listened in silence. On the outside, still on the inside, in turmoil, she was still sobbing when he took a step back. He looked at her for one more moment, a blank stare, as if he'd understood all he needed to, and then turned away. He left the room without a word. No yelling, no goodbyes, no promises, just the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hall. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the living room staring at nothing, trying to figure out when their story had started to unravel, and, above all, trying to accept there was no going back. The house had been quiet since the night before. Neither of them slept well after the video incident. The truth was out there, like a chasm they couldn't cross. He couldn't get the image of her dancing by the pool out of his head. The smiles, the closeness. He didn't need to hear more. He already knew enough. The next morning, he awoke before the alarm. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, until he made a decision. He got up slowly, went to the closet, and pulled out the blue suitcase she always used for short trips. It wasn't about anger or impulse, it was a conclusion. He started packing her clothes, folding them carefully. He packed her shoes, cosmetics, the new perfumes, chargers, everything. He didn't bother choosing or leaving anything behind. It all had to go. It was as if each piece of clothing he packed was another piece of their story that needed to be removed from the house and from him. As he pushed the suitcase into the living room, Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, barefoot, her eyes swollen from a sleepless night. She came down slowly, looking at the scene in disbelief. James didn't speak right away. He just left the suitcase in the middle of the room and pointed to the door. She tried to approach, but he stepped aside. She asked what was happening. He said that, during the night, he'd decided she no longer belonged there. She swallowed hard, tried to stay calm, but her voice trembled. She said she'd messed everything up, but it only happened once. She was confused. He'd pulled away many times. They had a history. It couldn't end like this. He said it ended the moment she chose to be part of someone else's story. She cried, tried to touch him, but he stepped back again. She begged for another chance, said they could fix what they'd built. He said she'd chosen to destroy what they'd built, and now he was just clearing the rubble. She fell silent, looked at the suitcase, then at him, and realized there was no room to argue. With trembling hands, she grabbed the handle and left, crying quietly. James closed the door firmly behind her, as if putting a period at the end of a sentence. That sound of the door closing was more symbolic than any argument could be. In the days that followed, she sent messages. some full of regret, others calmer, as if hoping time would lessen the weight of what she'd done. James didn't respond. He contacted a lawyer and started divorce proceedings, arranging everything to be quick, without delays. Their story had lasted long enough. When the papers arrived, he signed them without hesitation. 3 weeks later, James was driving home from work in silence when his phone rang. It was Emily. He thought about ignoring it, but something made him answer. On the other end, she was breathing heavily, struggling to control her emotions. She said she needed to tell him something. He stayed silent. She announced she was pregnant. His heart raced for a second, his mind blanked. The silence stretched between them. Then she said she'd found out that week at the doctor. James remained quiet. The car kept moving, but the road didn't feel the same anymore. The story, he thought, was over, might have started again. 2 months passed after that call. James went on with his life as if he hadn't heard anything. He kept working, reorganized his routine, avoided mentioning Emily. When someone brought her up, he changed the subject. To others, he seemed cold, heartless, almost cruel. But no one knew what he carried inside. He'd just decided not to be hurt by her manipulations again. Emily, on the other hand, didn't stop. She called, texted, stayed present in all his social circles. She talked to James's mom, dad, siblings, cousins. She cried to everyone, saying she was alone, abandoned, expecting a child whose father had turned his back on her. Her story moved everyone. His mom stopped taking his calls. His dad, usually reserved, sent a curt text saying he expected more empathy from his son. His siblings kept their distance. Childhood friends looked at him differently. Worst of all, no one asked for his side of the story. Until one random Friday, Michael, his best friend from college, showed up at his house unannounced. He brought 2 beers and a frustrated look. He sat on the couch and got straight to the point. He said everyone was talking about James like he was the bad guy, but he knew that wasn't who James was. James took a deep breath and, for the first time in weeks, told the whole story. The resort video, the dance with the stranger, the new lingerie, the coldness in her eyes, the sloppy lies, the argument, the suitcase, the separation, and finally, the call about the pregnancy. Michael listened in silence. When James finished, Michael said he knew James and that James knew what he had to do. A DNA test. There were tests you could do during pregnancy, expensive, but available. If Emily had nothing to hide, she'd agree. James thought about it all night. The idea seemed harsh, invasive, but it was the only way to protect himself from another blow. The next morning, he called Emily. She answered, quickly, as if she'd been waiting. The conversation was tense. He said he wanted a DNA test, a non-invasive prenatal one. She went silent, then spoke in an offended tone. Asked if he was saying she'd slept with someone else. He said he needed clarity. She'd disrespected their marriage, and he had a right to be sure. She cried, said he was being cruel, that she'd never been with anyone else, that the child was his, and she was tired of proving the obvious. But in the end, she agreed. They scheduled the procedure at a specialized clinic. He went with her, cold and silent. She tried to make conversation, smile, bring up old memories on the way. He stayed distant. The procedure was done, and despite the tension, both remained silent. 2 weeks later, James got a call from the clinic. The results? We're in, and it was clear he wasn't the father. He stood still for a few minutes, staring at the results. The words were raw, direct, emotionless, not consistent with paternity. It confirmed what his heart already knew. Still, it hurt not because he was surprised, but because it proved all the chaos of the past months could have been avoided if people had believed him from the start. He folded the document carefully, put it in an envelope, and went to his parents' house. When he arrived, everyone was there. His mom, dad, 2 older brothers. The air was heavy, short comments, distant looks. James said nothing. He walked into the living room, went straight to the center, and handed over the envelope. His mom looked alarmed. His dad frowned. His brothers exchanged glances. He left without a word, closing the door behind him with a silence as final as the truth in that envelope. Hours later, back home, he heard knocking at the door. When he opened it, Emily was there, looking defeated, her face marked by tears, hands trembling. She tried to hide her pain, but she was fragile, desperate. She begged for forgiveness, said she knew she'd messed up, that she'd hurt him, but the child needed a father. She stepped forward, eyes pleading. James stared at her for a few seconds, serious and calm, breathing steadily. Then, with the same composure he'd shown from the start, he simply wished her luck and closed the door. In the weeks that followed, messages started coming in, first from his brothers, then his dad. They all wanted to talk, asking if they could see him. His mom showed up with a homemade apple pie, tears in her eyes, saying she couldn't sleep since learning the truth. One by one, they reached out again, each with the same silent plea in their eyes, forgiveness. James listened without bitterness, but without haste. He didn't want things to go back to how they were before. He just wanted people to see him for who he was, a man who only wanted respect and honesty. Life found a new order. The wounds didn't vanish, but they began to heal. And in that quiet restart, he found something no one could take from him: peace.
Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. It's easy, fast, and it helps us produce new content.